It is June 4th, 2024, and Hezbollah has confirmed that it sent a squadron of drones over into northern Israel. This as we also have a number of rockets coming from Hezbollah that have sparked fires in northern Israel, adding yet another layer to the ongoing tensions that we see between Israel and Hezbollah. So, just how far are these tensions likely to build? How far is Israel likely to go? Oh, and we should also take into account the fact that Israel isn't just targeting Hezbollah in Lebanon. They're not just targeting the Palestinian people in Gaza or in the West Bank for that matter. They're also openly bombing Syria, still killing a number of people around and in Aleppo. And yes, even while you have some talk of a possible ceasefire coming from the US specifically, claiming that there is going to be some movement there, you don't have any sort of a confirmation from Israel that they are ever going to stop any of this, whether it's the ongoing bombardment and blockade of the Gaza Strip, or whether it's these continued attacks that we're seeing targeting Lebanon and Syria. So we got into all of that, taking a look at what's at stake here earlier with a special guest. So let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is veteran war correspondent Elijah Magnier. Elijah, thanks so much for taking the time to join me today.
Thank you for having me.
I want to get into the latest here as we've seen clashes continue over the border between Israel and Lebanon. Hezbollah actually confirmed that it had launched a squadron of drones towards the headquarters of the Israeli military's Galilee formation, amid reports that Hezbollah's rocket attacks sparked wildfires in Israel's north. Will you take us through the latest and the significance of what we're seeing when it comes to these tensions?
Well, actually, it's very significant because normally when there are peace talk or negotiation between two parties, there is always a condition where either one side is stronger than the other, or there is a kind of equilibrium without really having any leverage on the other. And normally when the winner is the one who's negotiating from an upper position, and imposes the condition on the other. So we see the Palestinian resistance today in Gaza having only the card of the captives to negotiate with. And we have seen a reduction of its capability to launch missiles and rocket on Israel. Nevertheless, still having enough strength to fight the Israelis when they break into the north or the south or Rafah or wherever they are on daily basis engaged with them. In this case, Hezbollah is taking over. So the pressure is not coming from the Palestinians in Gaza because they've been battling for the last 8 months, and the Israelis have been merciless in killing the civilians, including the families of those who are fighting, to really deprive them from the will to fight. This is not happening, but Gaza is not as armed as Lebanon because Hezbollah is much more well equipped and it has the sufficient weapons to inflict serious pain on Israel and create deterrence and equilibrium in anything that the Israelis are doing or they think they can do. And the pressure then is coming from Hezbollah. And since more than 20 days, when Hamas accepted the deal with the Israelis and Israel refused it, that was a position that we're very familiar with Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, taking whatever he can and then starting the negotiation all over again to force the Palestinian to release more concessions, because now they will be under more pressure saying, okay, this is where you've been the last time. Now we need to give more because the last time it was not accepted. Then you have to give more concession, which is exactly what's happening. But the Palestinians are not in a position of weakness because of Hezbollah and Yemen. And particularly Hezbollah, that has been bombing the Israelis very seriously, critically, Every time the Israelis use phosphorus bombs, Hezbollah manages to burn the equivalent of forest that the Israelis are burning in Lebanon. The Israeli, for example, launched 200 attacks by drone or artillery or air force. Hezbollah launched back 200 attacks with drones and rockets that are equally destructive on the Israelis. So the Palestinians don't feel really negotiating from a weak position because Hezbollah has given the right to negotiate on their behalf. And the Palestinians now can dictate when the war will stop between Israel and Lebanon, using this card when they negotiate with the Israelis around the table. And this is why it was important for Hezbollah to increase the destruction that Hezbollah can inflict on the Israelis, to make sure that the Israelis understand as long as the war continues in Gaza, they will suffer serious casualties and destruction into all their northern settlements. Not only that, Hezbollah is attacking the Golan Heights, is going to Naharia, is going to area very close to Haifa, to show the Israelis that we can expand, but Hezbollah is not targeting civilians, is targeting military objectives. And this is why it was important for Hezbollah to show a little bit of teeth and to show the Israelis that we are capable of harming you as long as the war continues in Gaza. So it is in the benefit of the Israelis to stop it. They not only suffering serious damage to the infrastructure, to the settlement. There are more than 100,000 Israelis internally displaced, but also the Hezbollah is blinding the Israelis, hitting their intelligence and observation capability, hitting every single barrack in showing to the Israelis the bank of objectives that is so rich that Hezbollah has really so many choices to hit any target that is a military target within 5 to 40 kilometers, depending on how deep the Israelis would go into the Lebanese territory.
Okay, that's good to know. And I appreciate you laying that out, especially from the standpoint of I feel like a lot of times when we talk about the Palestinians, it feels as though they're so isolated. Obviously, the overwhelming majority of countries throughout the international community are doing virtually nothing for the Palestinians right now. So it's really interesting to kind of take into account the allies that they do have nearby that are acting on their behalf, but at the same time are kind of holding back and allowing the Palestinian resistance that we do see in Gaza to do what they can there. Now, I am curious when it comes to the latest attacks from Hezbollah, do you expect to see a response from Israel? And as you were pointing out there, you know, if Israel does respond, then Hezbollah just has the power to escalate it again and again. So what are those concerns for further tensions there?
So every military body never excludes an all-out war. Nevertheless, the chances of a war are very slim with Lebanon. So we're not talking about a wider war. There is already a war between Hezbollah and Israel. But we have seen the Israelis trying from time to time to impose the rule of engagement of Hezbollah by, for example, attacking 80 kilometers or even 100 kilometers in Lebanese territory, then Hezbollah retaliating into the occupied Syrian Golan Heights. So that is an area for the Israelis that is extremely sensitive because it has a control until Turkey of all the movement in the air and on the ground. They have Unit 9,900 that controlled all the communication system, etc. All that the Hezbollahis are destroying. So we have seen Magnier asking for a larger war against Lebanon. We've heard Bezalel Smotrich, the two ministers, Bengvir is the security minister, and Smotrich is the finance minister, saying that we need to burn Beirut. But they are not decision makers. They are not the one sitting as in a war cabinet that decides where the war should go and where it should start. Well, actually, in a few hours, there is a meeting of the war cabinet that's going to decide what to do with Lebanon. But again, we're talking about four people. First is the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is not a military man, who's very wicked and understands the losses that he can suffer on economy, army, civilians, if he starts a war with Lebanon. Secondly, we have three generals. The defense minister, Yoav Gallant, the former chief of staff, Gabi Eisenkot, the former chief of staff and minister, Benny Gantz, who understands the price of a war. And they understand how much Israel is suffering economically. So they've reached $57 billion, and it's still accumulative because they're suffering on so many levels. We can talk about it another time or later, I don't know. But they are very much aware of the price they need to pay if they start a larger war with Lebanon. And something that people are not aware of that is important is that Hezbollah is a weapon producer, manufacture its own weapons. So not only it comes from Iran, but it's developing its own weapons to fit the battlefield. So we're not talking about how much ammunition Hezbollah has, because it can produce what it needs for a long war. And it's still using small caliber relatively to what there is in its arsenal to for the Israelis to understand what kind of destruction they can suffer from if they enlarge a battle.
Wow, yeah, that is definitely good to keep in mind. And, speaking of the fights that Israel is picking around the world, is of course, it's not just in Gaza or in the West Bank or in Lebanon with Hezbollah. You also have Israel at the same time bombing Syria, with reports that Israeli airstrikes around the city of Aleppo killed several people early on Monday, including an Iranian military advisor, marking the first killing of an Iranian official by Israel since that April 1st attack on the Iranian consulate in Damascus. Now, I know we've kind of gotten used to Israel bombing Syria really whenever it feels like it, but what do you make of this latest attack and the escalations it could lead to?
Well, the Iranian advisor was killed in a field as an advisor. He was not killed inside an embassy or a consulate that is considered an Iranian territory. In the field, that is something that's considered acceptable as casualties that the Iranians or Hezbollah or the Syrians would suffer from. Now, all that is related to President Bashar al-Assad of Syria, who is not willing to start a war against Israel for his own reasons. So he has a front with the Kurds and the Americans in the northeast. He has another front with Turkey and Al-Qaeda and all the people who are under the control of the jihadists in the northwest. And for the Israelis, it's very easy to use the Air Force and go and destroy all the defensive measures that the Syrian army has taken on the east and on the west. And that will make the Syrian army very vulnerable in front of his enemies, who are well equipped, well trained, and they can take advantage of the situation and break into Aleppo on one side in the west, which is something that they can do, supported and helped by the Israelis. And this is why President Assad has been just allowing the support to the access of the resistance to flow through his country. He's supporting the Palestinian resistance because there is not only Hamas, there is the Islamic Jihad, the Popular Front, the Ahmed Jibril people, the Popular Front General Command. There are so many other groups that are supported by Syria and the axis of the resistance. And they are in Syria, indeed, where they have their headquarters, not only in Lebanon, but also in Syria. And this is how much President Assad can give. Now, Israel takes advantage of what President Assad position is in Syria with his enemies on two sides in the north and the east, unwilling to start a destructive war with the Russian that are also in Syria without the will to see what's happening, taking another scale when the Russians are very busy with another war in Ukraine. And that Israel, according to its own evaluation, was correct for the Israelis. They think we're not going to be attacked and we are unaccountable for whatever we do in Syria in violating its sovereignty. For that, they can feel free to go and attack in Syria and try to reduce some of the Syrian capability. Moshe Yaalon, the defense minister of Israel, when he was a defense minister, now he's a former, said every 5 trucks we destroy 1. Every several shipments that come to Syria from Iran to enhance and increase the Syrian capability, they pick up 1 every 10. So really the Israelis are just saying, hey, we are still here. This is what we can do, but it doesn't have any strategic value.
Yeah, and I think that that's definitely good to keep in mind when we do see that back and forth. And as you were pointing out, there are a lot of moving parts there, and I can see, especially Syrian President Assad being in that position of knowing that any move he makes has a consequence and could lead to a number of greater conflicts. Now, bringing it back to the US, I know that the Biden administration came out late last week and claimed that, oh, they are pushing for this 3-phase plan, which could lead to a ceasefire in Gaza. Now, Israel seems to be on a completely different page, even though Biden was making it sound like he was speaking for Israel. It doesn't seem as though they have apparently seen the same deal. But even if we do have, in some magical world, there is a ceasefire in Gaza, which I'm a little skeptical that that is what the US is actually pushing for. Even if that is the case, that doesn't stop Israel from bombing Lebanon or bombing Syria and carrying out all of these different acts of aggression. Is there any reining Israel in at this point, or is the hope that all of these different countries or forces, groups really, are able to just kind of keep Israel contained on their end without this spreading to an even greater war?
Now, the Americans have explained from the very beginning they don't want a wider war, because then they have to cover Israel back. Israel is incapable of winning over Gaza, so it is out of the question that the Israelis will win any other war against particularly a non-state actor like Hezbollah, who is between, let's say, to be modest, 20 to 50 times stronger than the Palestinian resistance, because Hezbollah has the borders more open, it has access to more sophisticated and destructive weapons. It doesn't live in an open air concentration camp like Gaza, and it has thousands of special forces who are trained even better than the Ranger or the Navy SEAL or whatever, because they endure a very strict training program, and they are well equipped, even better than the Israelis on individual basis. And we have seen how they managed to create a balance between the superiority of Israel in the air with Hezbollah's missiles. So on that, there is a balance. But nevertheless, in Syria, there is no way Israel is going to stop unless Syria decide to start responding to the Israelis. And Iran and Hezbollah advised Syria that they are ready to defend it and they are ready to participate to any war in the future against Israel, but the decision is in the hand of President Assad, and I don't think his economy permit him. So Yemen and Lebanon are related to Gaza. The decision comes from the Palestinian resistance. If Israel continue the war, Yemen and Lebanon and the Iraqi resistance will continue bombing the Israelis. Now, the Israelis have also shown that they have respected to a good degree, not a complete and fully, but to a good degree, the rule of engagement that Hezbollah has imposed on Israel is not going to go beyond that. So we know that everything will stop once the war in Gaza stops. Nevertheless, we're not facing that yet. Biden spoke about a lasting ceasefire for 42 days. So we understand that in a lasting, not permanent ceasefire, one of the two parties can start the war again. Also, if the Palestinians start releasing some of the captives, who is the guarantor that the Israeli will not just take the first batch and then start the war again? Now, this is where Netanyahu is playing, because he's telling his far-right member of the cabinet that he has a written document of all the deal that he has given to Biden. And then, according to what Itamar Ben-Gvir said, Netanyahu told him next day via his national security advisor that there is no such a document. But then we hear Qatar saying we have received the document from Israel, which is pretty much like the main line that Biden said on the Friday, and told the world that there are three phases, without going into much detail, because the details are the most important and the more difficult to overcome. So Netanyahu is lying to his allies, because he knows that they want to occupy Gaza. They want him to occupy Gaza. They want him to expel the Palestinians, and they want a military ruling to be able to reconstruct settlements in Gaza. And this is something that he can't do, because the Americans are trying to help him by telling him, you failed to occupy Gaza, you failed to destroy Hamas. We have to go and talk to Hamas, those who we consider our enemy. The Americans and the Israelis are negotiating with Hamas. Again, those they said they have decimated, which they haven't. And then you were giving the chance to do it, but you're not managing. Allow me to help you. You stop the war, and we find another way to defeat Hamas when we want to start the reconstruction. So they can't speak about what's going to happen next, because they haven't finished to know what's going to happen next. And they don't have the upper hand. The only thing they have, which is very important, is the reconstruction. Who controls the flow of material into Gaza? That is in the hand of the Israelis. And in 2023, when the war started, there were still more than 100,000 Palestinians whose homes were not reconstructed, because the Israelis restricted the access of building material into Gaza. So we can imagine that Israel will make sure that Gaza will be reconstructed in 15 or 20 years.
Yeah, wow. There's certainly a lot at stake there, a lot of moving parts to continue to keep an eye on. And I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down all of the latest here. Veteran war correspondent Elijah Magnier, thank you so much for your time and insight.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. If you want to support my work, you can also check out my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/rachelblevins. That's where you can sign up as a monthly paid subscriber and join the community there. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.